Well, good morning, everyone. I feel like a bit of a school teacher then, actually. My name's Melissa, and I've got the pleasure of being your MC this morning, bright and early. Hope you've got a cup of tea and a piece of toast, and are very excited for what we have in store for you today. I begin this morning's session, though, of course, by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Wathaurong people. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Now, before I introduce our speaker today, I'd just like to obviously thank our Biznet sponsors, who are Adroit Insurance and Risk, BJT Legal, People at Work, Findex, Radio Ballarat, and the support of the City of Ballarat. Now, obviously things are a bit different this morning. It's not how we would usually do a Biznet breakfast, so I'm really keen to keep this as conversational and as involved as we physically can across Zoom. So if you have any questions throughout this morning's session, pop them in the chat box in the Q&A section, and we'll get to them as we go, I think. So yeah, as anything pops up, pop it in there, and yeah, we'll try and keep this a really open chat. So get those minds thinking and questions ready. But of course, it's not just me talking this morning. It's time to introduce our guest speaker, Ameet Bains. He is, of course, the CEO of the Western Bulldogs Footy Club in the Australian Football League. Ameet is also a director of the club and of the SpiritWest Foundation, which is the Western Bulldogs Community Foundation. Now, within the AFL industry, Ameet has served on numerous advisory groups, participated in the AFL Executive Leadership Program, and has been a recipient of the prestigious industry Graeme Samuel Scholarship. So, Ameet, welcome. What an introduction.
Thank you, Melissa. Good morning, everyone. Hope it finds everyone safe and well.
And I guess first things first, you're not in the same state as us at the moment. You're on the Gold Coast, I believe, still, correct?
Yes, absolutely. The season obviously relocated a number of weeks ago, and with it, so did all the players and staff and officials. So have been up here for a number of weeks now.
Yeah, so a crazy time. I guess the best way to kick this off is to perhaps give us a brief overview of these last few months. Obviously, you know, the footy season in particular has been one of those industries that the change and the impact of the pandemic has been really visible, and really dramatic, I suppose. So particularly from, you know, the perspective of you as CEO of a footy club, what have these last few months looked like?
Yeah, absolutely. I should say at the outset, we readily acknowledge that this is a significant health issue in the first place, and then obviously has the flow-on economic effects, and it's something that's affected the whole country, and obviously Victoria and Melbourne in particular is struggling the most at the moment. But as you said, I'll give you the perspective from the football industry. It started really, as we all know, way back in March, and I think that week leading into the start of the season ended up being one of the most surreal weeks for any of us. We as a club had been highly anticipating our round one game due to play Collingwood. Both teams had played finals the previous year. Big Friday night game from a club perspective, our most commercially lucrative home game for the year. So a lot of reasons why we were looking forward to it. And as the week rolled on, it became apparent that there might be a restriction on the crowd. As we got closer, there was no crowd. And then really, in the last 24 to 48 hours prior to the game commencing, there was the prospect of the game not going ahead and the round not going ahead, which it ultimately did, and we were grateful for. But then by Sunday, the whole round and season got suspended. So that sent everyone into a fairly dramatic tailspin. And I suppose we'll talk about a few elements of it from a business perspective this morning. But, you know, the last few months as a result have seen things that we never thought or expected. You know, we were forced to go into survival mode as an industry and as a club, and that meant having, you know, 2/3, 3/4 of our staff on stand down for a significant period. And as the season started, we got underway in Melbourne, but obviously as the virus spread throughout Victoria, the other state borders were closed to Victoria, so a decision was made to relocate. So this is around week 9, I think, now for the Victorian teams to be out of Melbourne, and 3 weeks to go in the season. We're all accustomed to our new surrounds, I suppose, and have dealt with it, and obviously very fortunate and privileged to be here and having the season continue on.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a testament to everyone's adaptability that the new normal has kind of settled in for you guys a bit up there, and even just the way the footy season is. I think we've all got used to all these games on so regularly, so we are adapting. You mentioned the business side of things, and I'm curious to, obviously, we're not going to be all doom and gloom this morning, but I do want to touch on what you think has been the biggest challenge from a business perspective with all of this. And I'm sure there are many, but what has been kind of the biggest learning in that regard?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge initially has been dealing with such an unforeseen circumstance. So, like any business, you compile your budget, at the end of the previous financial year going into the next financial year. And for us, that's in our industry is 1 November to 31 October. And whilst you build in a range of assumptions and risks, obviously nothing was forecast
No.
for the extent of the issue we've had. So I think dealing with a scenario where we knew that we were going to be significantly less in revenue compared to where we were was the biggest shock at the start. And I think that then led to a number of heartbreaking decisions around staffing and the removal of other costs just to stay afloat. And certainly as we go into 2021, and I think it will have been read about by many on today's call, the industry has started to make some permanent change going to 2021, and that's been the hardest part. I think over the next couple of weeks we'll say goodbye to a lot of people who are good people doing a good job, and through no fault of their own won't be with us going into next year. And I think that's the hardest part. As a business, we feel that we've built a really strong business model, staffed with really quality people, and to have to really pull that apart has been difficult. And really just to round that out across the industry, and we're no different, clubs will be 25 to 30% or operating with 25 to 30% less costs going into 2021. So that's been the most significant change.
Yeah, it's a big difference, isn't it? You mentioned the people element of it there, so let's touch on that. I mean, a big part of you in your role would be making sure that your people are okay mentally throughout all of this, whether it's people being let go or people that have had to relocate like yourself. How has the club and perhaps the wider industry as well kind of dealt with the mental health challenges of all of this?
Yeah, it's been really significant, and the same for everyone on this call. Obviously Melbourne, it's a bit more grim in that regard, and that's really the connection piece. I think one of the great parts of working in the sport industry, and certainly a football club, is the sense of connection that everyone shares and that sense of belonging and passion that comes with that. So to have not had that has been really difficult. So we've tried a number of different ways, particularly say in more recent times with stage 4, around connection through Zoom. It's obviously far from ideal, but running information sessions in a formal sense on a regular basis, I think people are most anxious, or have been most anxious, about knowing their future and what that looks like. But then in and around that, running 2 separate categories of events. So one, the more social. So we've done what we call good morning Zooms, where once a week people can jump on at 9:30 in the morning and come with a coffee or tea, and it's just an opportunity really to see each other's faces and say hello, right through to Friday afternoon trivia, which again is a bit of fun. But then we've also run health and wellbeing webinars through the period as well. And we've been fortunate through, and you mentioned in my introduction, being a director of the Western Bulldogs Community Foundation. Through the foundation, we run pretty significant men's and women's health programs, which are, as many would know on the call as well, are run through Ballarat and the adjoining areas. And through there is a level of expertise that we contract to present around issues of mental health. So being able to tap into those things has been really positive as well. And then as a final thing, when stage 4 commenced, we've started a wellbeing challenge for those that wanted to participate, where once a week there's a focus. So it might be exercise, it might be mindfulness, whatever the case may be. And everyone, there's a WhatsApp group, and everyone joins in and posts daily updates on what they've done. And then a winner is selected each week who receives a gift voucher. But again, just a way for people to have a bit more purpose and focus and connection in a time that's obviously very difficult.
Yeah, it's crucial. We had a chat last week, and a recurring theme from it was that culture is a strategy, and I think that that's really crucial. More than ever through the pandemic, but also I think it's something that footy clubs, and particularly Western Bulldogs, as you mentioned through your community programs, is something that you guys are really good at. That the value in culture and community involvement. And would you say that the community foundation side of the football club has perhaps been sort of more satisfying or more important than ever this year?
Oh, no doubt. If I look at any year and reflect on what the club has done, the Community Foundation looms large, as the vehicle through which we get most pride in terms of helping people. But this year, more so than ever, as you say, Melissa. And I think one of the real success stories of our year in terms of learning from a business point of view has been through the Community Foundation. We've run almost 100% of our programs, which are, as I said, men's and women's health, youth leadership and diversity and social inclusion. They've been in-program delivery across the west of Melbourne and Western Victoria, as I said, including Ballarat. But given the circumstances this year, that's moved to an exclusive online delivery. And I think what the guys within the foundation have done really well is deliver a program that is still very engaging and can still satisfy most of the needs associated with that. So we've seen not only consistency in the number of participants, but in some of the programs we've actually seen a growth this year, which in some respects is not surprising. It's a lot easier for people to jump online and do a program from their home rather than having to go somewhere. But I think that's been critical.
Yeah, definitely. And satisfaction and pride, I think that's, people are searching for a bit of purpose more than ever this year. So tapping into that sort of thing is as valuable as ever. One last thing before we start to get into some more of the positive and inspirational parts to come out of this year. I just wanted to ask about, kind of trying to look ahead. And I think it's a real theme for Victoria at the moment when everyone's kind of searching for these roadmaps out of lockdowns and things like that. For the business side of things for you guys, have you commenced your projections for next year, and how do you start to plan for the future when it is still so uncertain?
Yeah, look, it's incredibly difficult. I think the biggest challenge for us in that planning and where the uncertainty is the greatest is around games, clearly. So one, when are we able to play matches back in Victoria? But then, what hangs off that? When are we able to have crowds and the other elements? So, the questions we're asking, and as you cascade through the questions, the financial implications become greater. But, are we able to have crowds? If so, are we able to have full crowds? Based on that and that uncertainty, are people still going to be buying memberships at the same level? If they're buying memberships, are they buying a reserve seat or are they buying a 3-game membership because there's uncertainty about whether they can attend or not? I think they're the questions that have the most significant implications for us. And even as we've seen this year, where we have contracted partnerships with our sponsors and other stakeholders. Not all, but a lot of those partnerships are predicated on there being a full AFL season and everything that comes with that in terms of the benefits they receive. So, whilst we've got certainty as to what those partnerships look like in 2021, if we then don't deliver a full season with all of the benefits, then, we're quite rightly having to provide a bit of compensation for that as well. So that's the largest part of the uncertainty, and is arguably a bit more unique to the Victorian clubs, because if you look at this year, Brisbane and Gold Coast haven't hubbed for 1 week. The two Adelaide teams have only had to hub for 4 weeks and they've been fine. And even the WA clubs, if it wasn't, which is legitimate, but if it wasn't for their stricter quarantine laws, they wouldn't have had to hub at any stage. So it really is largely a Victorian problem, but they are the major issues we're grappling with. And depending on the best case, worst case scenario, it can be many millions of dollars difference. So yeah, there's a lot to work through yet.
I love that you're saying all of that with a positive attitude and a smile on your face, Ameet, because it's a lot, because no one has the answers and there is still so much uncertainty. So you're exactly right. You've got to keep that optimistic outlook on it all, because we can't change it and no one has the answers yet. And you've just got
No.
to keep adapting, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think going back to the question you asked before, one of the other things I was meant to say, which I forgot, was, one of the greatest learnings from this year is just that, to keep a really open mind and be flexible. I think we all were really overwhelmed at the start of the COVID virus and the crisis and our season being suspended. But as the year's gone on, I think we've learnt the value of just being really open-minded, because otherwise, if you become too steadfast or hung up on an approach or a plan, that can lead to incredible disappointment. And if you're not moving the business in a pretty nimble way, again, there's pretty significant consequences. So I think we've just learned to roll with the punches a bit more just to get through.
I mean, it's a good lesson to learn. We probably wouldn't have liked to learn it so dramatically like this, but you're right. Which, on that theme, I wanted to ask about what have been some innovative things that you've had to introduce to the business in order to not only survive but continue to thrive. What have been some of the new innovative things that you've done that you wouldn't have otherwise, and then also that might actually stick around beyond the pandemic, and things that you wouldn't have considered trying that way, but now actually you will continue to do it that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first off the bat is the example I gave with the Community Foundation. So whilst we've been forced into doing all of our programs online this year, there's no doubt that we'll look to retain an element of that going forward. We're working through what the split might be, but for argument's sake, might be, a quarter of what we do remains online, and that gives us a real opportunity to extend out into, other parts of the west of Victoria that make it, in ordinary times, make it difficult to access or get to. I think a couple of the other things, I'll speak more broadly just to make it relatable to other businesses, regardless of what people do who are on the call today. I think the digital side of our business has really enhanced. So we've always had a very strong social media presence through our website as well, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all those things. But this year, the way in which we've been forced to communicate again has almost solely been through those means, given there hasn't been an ability for our fans to get to games or get to training or visit the club shop or things that would normally bring them the genuine connection with the club. So I think we've really reframed the way in which we've used our digital platforms to connect, and we've developed a lot more behind the scenes and inner sanctum content as well, to give people a glimpse at things that they might otherwise see if they were able to physically attend games and the like. And part of that has also been, showcasing the personalities of some of our players, both our men's and women's players, and how they're dealing with things at different times as well, at home or, from a health and lifestyle perspective, given some of the constraints. And then I think the third one that we'll certainly keep is an element of flexible working arrangements. I think as organisations, we've also always been a bit apprehensive about going too far with flexible work arrangements, whether that's, how much do you lose by not having that in-person contact? Can you trust everyone to do the right thing when they're not in the office? But this period has shown us that, those fears can be put to the side, and as long as there are reasonable parameters put around and expectations put around people working from home and what they're expected to do, you can get a lot done. So I think those opportunities will be there as well. So, looking at even selfishly ways in which you can reduce costs around, travel and other things like that, we'll certainly be able to do more meetings and catch-ups in this way going forward.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. A reminder to anyone, if you've got any questions, we are getting towards the back end of things, so pop them in the Q&A box and we'll put them to Ameet before we have to let him go off into the sunshine. Do you have a bit of that survivor guilt, Ameet? I mean, it's not it's not sunshine and holidays for you up there, but conditions are a little bit different for you guys up there. Has that been a challenge for you up on the Sunshine Stage?
Yeah, it has been, and I can talk through that in a little bit more detail to give people insight. I think it's a delicate balance. I think everyone up here most definitely sees themselves as fortunate and are getting to do things that they wouldn't be able to do back home, particularly in Melbourne, maybe less so for regional Victoria. But there is an element that we're out of Victoria, particularly during winter. It's obviously nice and sunny here, so you can be outdoors. But the balance of that is that, we spoke offline last week, the way I would describe being up here is like an elongated school camp. So the challenge with being up here is the intensity of the environment. So we're staying in the same hotel. We're with, have been with two other clubs at times, another club, but you're seeing everyone you work with every day, for meals. All your meetings are in the same hotel where you stay. So from a mental perspective, you don't get that break. That's the downside. But the positive side is that we can go out. So, just to clarify for people, Queensland essentially has little or no restrictions on movement. But from an AFL perspective, we're still required to observe stage 3 restrictions. So it'd be no different to what everyone in Ballarat's facing. So exercise or essential services, things like that. And those rules are in place now really to protect the AFL community's mission in Queensland, but to protect against someone within the hub COVID and then channel teams not being played, that we have here is a social interaction, particularly compared to Melbourne. Whilst we are in Melbourne, I think that's the biggest challenge. But to your point, yeah, particularly saddened by, even talking to my parents this week in Melbourne with the storms that hit in a number of suburbs, have been left without power, and then given some of the issues have made it here. You don't take those things for granted.
No, I think actually people are very appreciative that you've all do watch and a little bit of normality as well. I don't think that is lost on everyone back here. Ameet, we've got a few questions coming through, so I'll put a few to you. This one's a bit of a different one, but I'm curious as well. Paul wants to know, do we have a date for the grand final public holiday? You're CEO, you must know. Is that still happening?
It's a very good question, Paul. I'm not sure. I've only, given we're up here, we haven't contemplated that too much. The last I heard was that there would be a grand final holiday, regardless of whether it was played in Melbourne or not. But I haven't heard any further. And at that time, I had heard it would attach to whatever weekend the grand final would be, which will be the 24th of October. So, whether there is a holiday on that Friday the 23rd, I'm not sure. But that was the intention that we had heard maybe 6 weeks ago.
It's an interesting question though, Paul, because you're right. It is, it's actually a very big consideration for Victorian businesses. It changes quite a lot. So an interesting question. And yeah, I think jury's still out. We're not sure, but okay. It seems to be expect the holiday to still go ahead. Kim's got a question. We've touched on it a little bit, Ameet, but she said, how have you adapted to the mental health well-being side of things? I guess personally as well, what have you found most challenging, and how have you changed some of your behaviours to, as you mentioned, kind of survive through the school camp nature of being up there?
Yeah, I think for a lot of us, the exercise part has been critical, just to get active and mentally just to have a break from things. But it's also finding other ways to relax as well. I think one of the dangers here, and I'll be honest, being guilty of not getting this right more than I have been of getting it right, is because you're in this work environment, it's very easy to catch up with someone after dinner for a meeting, or be on your emails till late, because your brain's just wired to work. So more recently been a bit better at, whether it is watching something on Netflix or reading a book or trying to do something that is a bit different. And I've been fortunate that in the last few weeks, a chunk of our travelling party, my family's come up to Queensland as well. So having my wife and 2 young kids here has been the other part of distraction, I suppose, being able to have, albeit in constraints, have family time together as well. But it is a big challenge, and I think part of it is also continuing to check in on each other and just make sure everyone's doing well, and particularly when we know if people are missing significant milestones. So, like the coach last weekend hasn't got his family up here, Luke, but celebrated his 50th birthday, and it was a nice thing for us to be able to do with him here, but at the same time, he wasn't with his family. So when those moments are there as well, it's also checking in on people.
Yeah, checking in is definitely the big theme of this year. Another one more business related in regards to reducing staff by 30% for 2021. If crowds, members and sponsorship return to pre-COVID numbers maybe in 2022, what will the clubs or AFL do with the extra profit?
Yep, good question. So just to clarify, we haven't reduced staff by 30%. It was costs, so that's staff and operating expenses. The staff won't be that high. Look, I think it's a good question. I think we have to plan, given the variables between best case and worst case, we have to plan for somewhere in between. And clearly, if the situation's better off than we anticipated, then our hope would be to build back up our business and continue to reinvest in things that we do. From a community foundation perspective, any time that the foundation runs well, that money is just reinvested into more programs and better program delivery, things like that across the club. There are things that we do across fan engagement and other activities to connect with our fans and members that are probably going to take a hit over the next 12 to 18 months. So it's potentially going to reinvest back in that. If I even look at, how our staffing will change, it won't necessarily all be just people losing jobs. There will be a number of people that retain their position, but it might go from full-time to part-time. So, if things are better off, we'd like to build up those roles back to full-time as well. But yeah, there's probably a series of things we'd like to do, but I think the reality for our business is that 2020 has just been about survival, and given the loss and reduction that all clubs have faced in terms of revenue, the next couple of years is really just building ourselves back up.
This must be an incredibly interesting year for you professionally. I suppose you've been in the industry for a while now, Ameet, and I guess this just must be, how have you found this? Has it been obviously incredibly challenging, but also rewarding? And have you, I guess, sort of expanded your own skill set in ways that you perhaps hadn't considered?
Yeah, absolutely. As you said a bit earlier as well, probably not the extent to which we wanted to go to learn and grow and develop, but it's certainly been that. I think we joke a bit with some of our team that no one needs to go overseas to study any leadership or management courses for quite some time, because we've lived it.
That's true.
Look, I think it has. You become a lot more resilient. You become a lot more pragmatic. I think just dealing with things, and you said, I had a bit of a smile as I was talking through things. I think that's the reality of it as well. You're not as scared now of what you have to confront, given what we've had to endure this year. It doesn't mean that you're not fear-stricken at times, or you don't get significantly worried or concerned about anything. Those things still exist, but I think the way in which you deal with them, and certainly on a personal level, the way in which I deal with them now is a lot more rational and calm than I might otherwise have done, given what we've had to endure during this year. And everything has become a bit more relative. Having dealt with what we dealt with at the start of the year, even as negative things have cropped up across the year, we've taken it in our stride a bit more in terms of processing it, because everything's relative. You can deal with a cut knee when you've, suffered worse wounds across the year.
Absolutely. That theme of resilience is a big one for 2020. We've got another question. How has the relationship been with your sponsors during this challenging period, which you touched on earlier? And we've got, have you got any more room on that shirt? Which is true. You've got plenty of sponsors on there, but I'm sure there's always room for more.
No, we do. It has been terrific. I think again, if you look at it, particularly in the sponsorship context, we've had a lot of pragmatic discussions. We're very fortunate to have a great suite of partners, and Ballarat is part of that. The city of Ballarat, Mars, Selkirk, a lot of local businesses who have supported the club really strongly as well. And we've just had to have pragmatic discussions because the reality is, for a lot of businesses, they've been affected as well. So, it may be the case that there's a contract in place, but they don't have a capacity to pay it in full. So we've also been accommodating with some of our smaller partners as well, who have been long-standing contributors to the club that might have experienced their own financial difficulty this year. So I think that's part of it, but it's a bit cliche, but it's times like these that really test the strength of those relationships. And yeah, it's been amazing. Even our members, across almost 40,000 members this year, we had been projecting to get to 50, and we're on track until COVID hit, but unfortunately things obviously slowed. But even out of 40,000 members, we've only had just under 900 people total request a full or partial refund this year, which has been staggering, given you consider that a number of those individuals will have gone through some really hard times themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a testament to things. But I think, as you touched on about projecting, and I think a lot of businesses are finding it as well, it's perhaps next year that we're all a little bit more nervous about rather than this year. But a great sign that people are still sticking around. A lovely comment from John Bradshaw. He says, "Hi, Ameet, just wanted to commend the Sons of the West program. I attended last night and the enthusiasm of the blokes and the Western Bulldogs staff was spot on." So there you go. That's always nice feedback to hear.
Fantastic, John, and great that you're partaking in that as well. I think that's, you talk about the pride before. I think a lot of the pride that comes with those programs is actually hearing the first-hand accounts of those that attend and how much they get out of it. Not just the program, but the friendships and connections they make to others that are participating as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We've still got a few more minutes, so if anyone else has some more questions, keep them coming through. We'll keep reading them. I made another one from Andrew. He said, "What's your gut feel on COVID-based crowd restrictions for next year? Will we see 90,000 people at a grand final or Anzac Day ever again?"
I'd like to think we will at some point.
Yes.
Whether it's next year or not, I'm not sure. I think everyone, I don't profess to be an expert on COVID, but have learnt a lot this year, and certainly in conversations with the AFL and government have a better understanding perhaps. But the real point will be whether a vaccine becomes available. I think until we get a vaccine and there's greater confidence in the risk of community transmission, it might take some time before we get there. But in saying that, we can look at some of the other states, and WA's bidding to host the grand final and are saying that by the end of October they would have full capacity for crowds. So you never know. I think whatever happens with us, it'll be a staged approach with respect to crowds. So Anzac Day being at the start of the year might be a bit difficult to project a full house, but hopefully come the end of September next year or whenever the grand final's played, that it's back in Melbourne and we do have a full house.
You're right, though, those other states, while it seems crazy to us here in Victoria, that provides a little bit of hope that maybe we can get to that stage as well and we'll have some crowds back. An interesting question from Anonymous. "I know the AFL had a lending facility for the clubs to use in need. Have the Western Bulldogs had to lean on this? I've heard other clubs' projections were actually a lot worse than what ended up eventuating."
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's a perceptive question. So the AFL, it's a lending facility, but they also had criteria applied to whether clubs were able to access it or not based on your financial position. And a lot of that related back to, what was the club's cash position and what debt, bank debt and the like you might have. So we haven't had to. We're in the fortunate position that we do have a reasonable cash reserve, which we've been compiling over the years, I suppose, to help fund a redevelopment at VU Whitten Oval over the coming years. And we also don't have any bank debt, so that's meant that we don't qualify for AFL lending at this stage. But the question, it was anonymous, wasn't it? It wasn't a name, but the
Yes.
question asked by the anonymous question asker is also right. Like, at the end of the day, we as an industry and clubs individually haven't realised our worst fears, and I think a lot of it has to do with some of those things that I spoke about. Number one being that members have really stuck by their clubs, but secondly, when that significant, it was a $600 million lending facility that the AFL established with its bank. When that was instituted, it was also projected on a worst case where games were not going to be played. So the other part is that the season's rolled on. In turn, it's meant that, broadcast-wise, the AFL's continued to receive its revenue, and in turn, clubs have been able to get their funding from the AFL that comes from that. So, it's been a lot better situation. And again, going back to one of the questions at the start, we just know how fortunate and privileged we are to be up here playing and continuing the season, because economically it's a lot better off than we thought we might be.
Well, exactly. I mean, earlier in the year, or particularly when things were on pause after that round one, I don't think we would have imagined that we would be here right now, and the season having been able to continue to, relative success right now. So there are positives to take away from that, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think everyone understands that and is grateful for that too.
Totally. A couple more. I'll indulge Michael here. There's always, whenever we do footy chats like this, there's always someone that wants to ask a decent footy question.
Sure.
Michael says, "Hi, Ameet. What makes Luke Beveridge such a good coach?"
Yeah, he's a very good coach. He's a very good person. I think that's a key starting point. Like any coach, player, team relationship, the relationship side of it is integral, and he's got a really good way about him, communicates really positively and strongly. I think he's one that is always more glass half full. I think at times we'd like the boys to get revved up a bit more perhaps, but I think that's a really key part of it as well. But he's also, and again, there's been a bit of focus on this in the AFL in the last 2 or 3 years, starting with our club, but then certainly Richmond and Collingwood to another extent, is around emotional intelligence. He's really good on connecting with our players in an emotional sense as well. So I think that builds really strong relationships and a healthy respect. In a football sense, I think he's just a really lateral and innovative coach. It doesn't always work in terms of some of those tactical moves, and it hasn't in the last couple of weekends perhaps for us, but I think he really pushes the boundaries in a way that not many of the coaches do, and that was a big part of why we won the premiership a few years ago.
I think that emotional intelligence in our leaders at the moment is as crucial as ever. So, certainly relevant right now. I think one last one to finish on for our Q&A. It feels fitting. Kim has asked, would it seem possible to have a game again in Ballarat next year? That's a question that everyone wants to know the answer to. What's the Bulldogs' relationship with Ballarat going to look like into the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were still hopeful up until Victoria moved into stage 4 that we would still play 2 games in Ballarat this year, that if we, if Melbourne was affected, that the AFL was working with the state government to allow us to play in Ballarat. But obviously, given the state of play now in Victoria, those plans were squashed. But yeah, we're fully expecting to play 2 games in Ballarat next year. And that is the end of our initial agreement, but we have been talking with the state government particularly, and we'll start or recommence discussions with the City of Ballarat about extending that out for a further 5 years. We really love and value our relationship with the people of Ballarat. I think what's important for us is that it hasn't been about just playing games down there. We obviously do a lot of work in a community sense. We've got our office in Mare Street that has been there for a while now. We run our next generation academies through Ballarat and further out in Western Victoria. So we just feel that there's a really strong connection with grassroots football in the community. And, I whilst it's not Ballarat, it was Bendigo, but I grew up in a very similar town, born and raised, and I understand the importance of community and connection and how much football can play and sport can play a part in that, and particularly at the elite level. So, yeah, absolutely love Ballarat. We've got a really good winning record in recent times there as well. So we see it as a home ground, and quite truthfully, our players continue to say that it's the best surface that they play on each year.
Really?
So, yeah, they do. So it's a real credit to the curators at Mars Stadium as well.
There you go. People love to hear that. Beautiful to hear, though, that you guys are still in love with Ballarat as much as Ballarat is in love with you. Ameet, before we wrap things up and I let you go, and thank you again for joining us bright and early for a chat about this crazy year, I guess I wanted to end on what has been the most inspirational thing to come out of 2020. We've touched a lot on the doom and gloom and the hard realities of it, but what has inspired you the most, whether it's, you know, that your staff have been so adaptable in moving states or, you know, adapting to new workflows? What's been the thing that's warmed your heart this year?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think it's the spirit and resilience of our people, and that's across the board, and they've been faced with different circumstances. So that's people who, as you say, they've had to uproot their lives, leave their family at home and be up here for an elongated period, or it's even the people that have been on stand down with their uncertainty about their job, but still turning up, as I said, for those sessions, whether it's trivia or social, with a smile on their face and just really wanting to be a part of it. You know, that's what fuels us all during this difficult time, knowing that we've got really good people who care deeply, not only about the club, but about each other. And I think, you know, in these difficult times, you need that strength and resilience across the board. You need that support because it's way too hard. Doesn't matter who you are or what you've done in life. It's way too hard to get through times like this by yourself.
Absolutely. Well said, and a beautiful way to finish, I think. Are we going to see some more Bulldogs wins? Obviously, last week was a crazy roller coaster and not exactly a beautiful way to finish the game, but how's the morale and how are things going to go on the field for the rest of the year for the Dogs?
Yeah, so I think everyone was really disappointed. Took a couple of days to recover after Friday. Obviously playing Geelong, a fantastic team, but to be 6 goals up and lose. We did lose a couple of players and played, you know, a lot of the match two players short, but still Geelong were too good in the end. So no, absolutely disappointing, and a couple of the clubs below us won as well. So we got pushed out of the 8 after the weekend. We've got 3 games to go, starting with West Coast Sunday night. So I think the morale's still very good, because I think even though we lost on the weekend, what it highlights is that if we play at our best, we can make the best look second rate. So it's just about maintaining that intensity and consistency across a game. So look, we're really hopeful that we can win the last 3 games and play finals again. But as the footy cliche goes, we'll take it 1 week at a time and hopefully get the job done against West Coast this weekend.
It's always good when a footy person can get in a footy cliche to finish it, mate. You haven't let me down. Well, all the best with the rest of that. Thank you again for joining us. And yeah, hopefully we see the Dogs in the finals. No
problems. Thanks, Melissa. And thank you everyone for taking the time to join this morning, and hope you all stay well and healthy over the next few weeks.
Thanks, Ameet. And I want to thank all of our Biznet sponsors again this morning for making this possible. And before I let you all go, just a quick plug for Ballarat's biggest night in. Keep your eyes peeled on your favourite hospitality venues as Commerce announces this Played Up Ballarat initiative later in the week. It's very exciting. They're working with Piano Bar as well. So keep September 12, also known as the last Saturday of lockdown, free in your diaries at the moment, because there are some exciting things coming up. So stay tuned for that, everyone. Thanks again, Ameet. Have a lovely day, everyone. Enjoy the sunshine and keep up the good work with lockdown.